Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Yoshi Itoku. I am the Research and Communications Facilitator for Printing Industries, and today I'm joined by Jason Kiekebosch, who is the Director of Tag and Test Training, which is a registered training organization in Australia and New Zealand that provides training and supplies for everyone's electrical safety. So today Jason will be telling us about testing and tagging for our industry, and he also has a special offer for our members. So be sure to stick around for that, or check out the Better Business section of our website because, of course, Jason's company is one of our Better Business partners. As always, we welcome your questions, so if at any time you would like to ask something, please just type it into the questions box, which is between polls and chat, and I'll be happy to read that out for you at the end of the webinar. That's it from me for the moment, so I'll now hand you over to Jason so that he can begin the presentation.
Okay, thanks Yoshi. So welcome to everybody, and thanks for tuning in today. Today is not supposed to be an attempt to try and sell you guys anything. I really just want to try and make it as more of an information session for the Printing Industry Association members, and just provide the forum for you guys to be able to ask any questions, and hopefully I'll try and do my best to answer them as best I can. So I guess the plan for today is really to try and keep this to a fairly brief presentation. I'll try and keep it well under the 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions towards the end. Okay, so what I'm going to try and cover the next half hour is just a brief overview of what testing and tagging is, what the laws and the regulations are, who can actually do the testing and tagging, a little bit about the process of testing and tagging, what equipment we would need to test and tag within the workplace, and then I'll cover off some more specific things in relation to a printing business, and how much it would cost under a couple of different models, whether you do it yourself in-house or you use an external contractor. And then we'll open up for questions. Okay, a little bit about myself. Obviously, as Yoshi said, I'm the Director of Test and Tag Training, so we're a registered training organisation that trains in all states throughout Australia. We also have another company that supplies all the equipment, the consumables, being the tags, and the portable appliance testers. So we're pretty much the one-stop shop for everything in the test and tag world. I actually started in the industry via printing, so I do understand a fair bit about what's involved in operating a printing business, and we still to this day do operate a printing business as part of the supply division of the business. We print the tags and labels that are used within the test and tag industry. So I'll try and draw on that experience where I can, and relate it back to those of you operating printing businesses. I'm also a board member of NESTA, which is the National Electrical Safety Testing Association. Okay, so testing and tagging, what is the actual process of testing and tagging? I'll get into that a little bit more later on, but essentially it's the regular inspection and testing of our portable electrical appliances within the workplace. So as employers, or as it's classified now under the new Workplace Health and Safety Act, they call us PCBUs, which stands for a person conducting a business or undertaking, just a little bit more of a broader terminology. But we have a duty of care to employees and to the general public that enter our workplace to make sure that the workplace is safe in all aspects of workplace safety, so not just the electrical appliances, but also things like forklifts operating in the areas, machine guards, trip hazards, handling of chemicals. I'm sure you're all well familiar with our various responsibilities for workplace safety. And test and tag is just one of those obligations. So the process of testing and tagging is defined within an Australian standard, which is listed there at the bottom of my slide at ASNZS 3760, and I'll touch a little bit about the standard in a minute. Electrical fatalities, just to give you a quick overview, these statistics are a few years old now, but it's quite difficult to get more up-to-date figures. But what that shows us there is that, so this is a list of all deaths via electrocution throughout Australia and New Zealand, and 46% of deaths with via electrocution have happened in the workplace, so it is a substantial hazard within the workplace. We very often get asked, is testing and tagging a law? And the simple answer to that is no, testing and tagging is not a law. You cannot get handed an on-the-spot fine if you haven't tested and tagged your equipment. If workplace health and safety inspector comes through from your relative state or territory, they will look at that as one of your areas that you should be adhering to. If you haven't done it, they will more than likely just recommend that you put something in place to have it done. So you can't be prosecuted for not having testing and tagging done is the simple answer. That pyramid that I've got there sort of gives you a little bit of a hierarchy of where things sit. So if we're being prosecuted, obviously we're going to be prosecuted via legislation and through an act, and that's what forms the law. And the Australian standard is what we would call a regulation. So it's a guideline that would be referred to should something go wrong. So in the instance if somebody's electrocuted in your workplace and you hadn't had a regular regime for testing and inspecting your electrical appliances, you are going to be found liable of not providing a safe workplace. So it's important that we understand that it is an obligation. If nothing ever happens and you never have your testing and tagging done, then you'll fly under the radar, which will be fine. But if something did happen, heaven forbid, then the insurance companies will be the first people to say, well, you know, these people didn't show duty of care, they didn't have a regular process of inspecting their electrical items, and they will straight away throw the book at you, and you'll be in a fair bit of financial trouble. So it's one of those necessary evils, unfortunately. Most of the things when it comes to workplace health and safety are a bit of a burden on the business. There's no financial reward for doing them. We don't make money out of spending time, you know, taking care of our workplace health and safety obligations, but the penalties obviously are there if we don't do it. So that answers the question about the law. So referring to the standard, the Australian standard is what we use as our guideline for the process of testing and tagging, and it covers not only the process but the types of things we test, how often we test, and it's basically the one guideline that's in place for this process. And if there was any form of action being taken, the first thing they would do is look at the Australian standard and say that this is the approved document and this is understood that we should be using that as a bare minimum for our process of testing and tagging. So standards are they're national documents, and they're normally developed by a joint committee with representatives from various forms of industry and government. They're set up as a national framework. When they're formulated, they go through a fairly lengthy process of public consultation where they seek feedback from industry and public, and then the end result is a final document that gets released as an approved standard. So they're live documents. They will change. In fact, I think there is a process in place where they do have a review. I'm not sure the exact time frame. I think it's at least every 10 years. They must be reviewed. The current standard that's in place for AS 3760, which is the testing and tagging side of things, was released in 2010. And the previous version to that was in 2005. So if there's a change in environment or a change in technology that they see it fit to make an amendment to the standard or to rewrite the standard completely, then that public consultation process gets underway and they will pass a new revised standard. It's up to the individuals to keep up to date with the standards, and you can do that by subscribing to standards websites. Regulatory bodies. So when it comes to actually enforcing the workplace health and safety legislation, of which the standard would form a regulation as part of that, we obviously all have our own independent state bodies and territory bodies. There has been a harmonisation process, which I'm assuming most of you are fairly familiar with your workplace health and safety and the changes. So there's a harmonisation process that has been underway and was released in January 2012. So what they were trying to do there was to bring together all the various legislation throughout Australia for the various states and territories and form one national document and one national act. And that was passed. There's still Victoria and WA at this stage have not adopted the national model. They are getting closer. I believe WA is fairly close to adopting it with some amendments to suit their state. And Victoria at this stage, we haven't heard any news as to whether they're going to come in line with it. So essentially each state, even though there is a national framework, it's up to each individual state and territory regulator to police workplace health and safety and then to apply the Act to their own territory. So there's a link there. Our website's got links to all these. If you're looking for more information on your obligations for testing and tagging or for other workplace health and safety matters, then you would start straight with your state body. And then for those of you within the states that would be coming under the national framework, it's also Safe Work Australia website, which has a fairly comprehensive list of information relating to all things workplace health and safety. There's a code of practice as well, which sits behind that, so I know I'm confusing you all with a lot of different information from standards and legislation and what have you, but there is a code of practice as well, which is around working with electricity in the workplace. That basically just refers to AS 3760. So when it comes to the process of testing and tagging, the codes of practice will say that equipment should be tested and tagged in accordance with AS 3760. Okay, so who can test and tag? That's a question that we obviously get asked quite a bit. It is a bit of a misconception out there that it needs to be done by an electrician. It certainly doesn't. You don't need to be an electrician to test and tag. So the options you've got, obviously there are still a lot of electricians out there that do testing and tagging as part of their service. So if you have electricians that come in as part of your preventative maintenance program for some of your printing presses, or if you're doing general maintenance on your building facility, it is quite possible that the electrician can do your testing and tagging as part of that service, and it may be that some of those have suggested it, or maybe some of you are currently using electricians. But you don't necessarily need to be an electrician, so that does open it up for somebody with less qualifications, I guess, or somebody that may not charge as much to be able to do the testing and tagging. So you need to be what's classified as a competent person. Now, a competent person is a fairly broad term, but in the Australian standard it does list the competencies that you need to have and the knowledge that you must have to be able to conduct the testing and tagging, and it covers off things like you must have a basic understanding of the basics of electricity, understand insulation resistance, and it goes into a few different technical terms, but it does go through what is required as the basic knowledge. So the standard, I've just covered that bit off. Yeah, so it goes through the skills. Now there's also two different types of qualifications that you'll see if you're looking around at training providers. There is a nationally recognised qualification, and then you'll have, I guess, a non-nationally recognised qualification. So for those of you that have been involved with training staff in other areas of your business, you will know that there are units of competency and there's qualifications that go around what's called the vet training framework. So there is a unit of competency that covers testing and tagging. It's got quite a long technical name, so I won't bore you with the name of it, but essentially it covers 2 units of competency. So when we do a nationally recognised qualification, we are issuing what's called a statement of attainment. The statement of attainment is made up of 2 separate units of competency. So one of those units covers basic occupational health and safety principles, which we actually conduct out as an online course, and then we conduct another face-to-face session in the classroom, which normally lasts for a day, for the testing and tagging side of things, in which we cover off all the information that's needed to be what they call a competent person. Now, the Australian standard doesn't actually stipulate that you have to do a nationally recognised qualification. So for those of you that are looking to perhaps get one of your staff trained up, you can do what we call our short course. So you don't have to do the nationally recognised training. If you were offering it as a service for testing and tagging, then that would be different. Some states do require that you have a nationally recognised qualification, and you must apply it through their state office for what's called a restricted electrical licence. That's just to be able to offer it as a service. But for those of you operating printing businesses, then you don't need to have anybody that's got a nationally recognised qualification. If you're just testing and tagging with your own equipment within house, you would do what we call a short course, which obviously is a little bit cheaper, and that is conducted one day face-to-face in a classroom style. Okay, so just going a little bit about the process of testing and tagging so you can get an understanding of what's involved. Once they've done their course and they understand the process, the actual process is to assess the environment. So you'll have a range of different types of environment within a printing industry. You'll have your press room or your main printing area, which essentially, depending on the type of printing you're doing, if you were conducting, say a small franchise type setup, which is all digital printing, then that's more of an office environment as opposed to, say, a large, multicolour press or big sheet fed areas that would have guillotines and those types of things, which is more of a manufacturing environment. So in classifying the workplace, we actually look at the different types of environments. So any business will have multiple types of environments, from what could be classified as a manufacturing environment right through to a non-hostile office type environment. So once they've assessed the environment, that will, which I'll touch on a little bit in a couple of slides, there is a table within the Australian standard which dictates the test frequency based on where the item is located. So it's quite straightforward. Essentially, a lot of people ask us, we've got a drill or we've got a guillotine, how often does the guillotine need to be tested and tagged? Well, it really depends on where that is located. So if it's located in what they classify as a non-hostile environment, and a non-hostile environment is an area that's not subject to dust, moisture or vibration, that's what it's actually classified in the standard, then it may be tested as infrequently as every 5 years. But if it's in a manufacturing type environment where there is lots of moisture, dust, vibration, then it would be a 6-monthly test cycle. So it basically just means that if it's subjected to potential to be damaged a lot quicker, then it needs to be more regularly inspected. So once they've done the assessment of the workplace, which would dictate the test frequency, then they've got to obviously assess the items that are under test. They do a visual inspection of it, so you your eyes over it, and there's a number of things that we train people to look for, and they'll also then get the classification of that type of appliance. And essentially there's 99% of the things that are tested in the workplace are, if it's a portable appliance, it's either what we call Class 1, which is an earth appliance. In other words, it has a protective earth circuit. And then there's Class 2, which is double insulated. So most of your handheld appliances these days are double insulated, which essentially means there is no earthing system in it. I won't get too technical with the electrical theory side of things, but it's quite a straightforward process to classify them as Class 1 or Class 2. And then your other options are going to be a lead, so whether it's an extension lead or a power board, or it might be what they call an IEC lead, which most computers and monitors and those types of things have an exchangeable IEC lead at the back of them. So once they've done all that classification, they simply conduct a electrical test using a portable appliance tester, which just provides them with a pass or fail, and it is actually stipulated within the standard that a competent person must use a pass-fail portable appliance tester. In other words, they can't use an instrument that requires interpretation. So an electrician, for instance, could use what we call an insulation tester to do certain parts of the testing, and that would provide them a reading of insulation resistance, but then you have to know the pass and fail rates by referring to the standard and make an interpretation of that reading as to whether it's safe for use. So a portable appliance tester takes all that guesswork out of it, and it simply gives them a pass or fail. But they must understand the process of classifying those items before they plug them in, and that's again part of the training. Once they've done that, they tag the item. So if it's a passed tag, or if the item passes, it'll get a compliant tag, and if it fails, then there's a process in place for removing that unsafe item from the workplace. And then they record the results. So portable appliance testers, they essentially they can range anywhere in price from sort of $600 to $6,000. But at the end of the day, they pretty much all do the same basic tests. Some of the more expensive and more advanced testers will have more advanced functionality with regards to recording results and may hook up to printers and scanners and those sorts of things to streamline it. So anybody that's offering testing and tagging as a service where the volumes are quite high and they're going to be entering multiple workplaces, they would have one of those more advanced testers that has lots of data capability to store results and provide reports for their clients. For most of those listening that are involved with a printing business, then you would just need to have a fairly basic tester, and there's a number of different options for your recording of results. So essentially the process is they inspect, they test, they tag and they log. That's a 4-step process that we cover off through the training. So looking at what equipment needs to be tested. New equipment, we often get asked whether new equipment needs to be tested and tagged. So essentially new equipment does not need to be tested straight away. It's covered by the manufacturer for the initial period. Where it does need to be tested is normally once it hits its first test cycle. So let's say we've got a manufacturing environment or a really industrial print press area. The test sequence or test process for that would be 6 monthly. So let's say we do install a new press, then it doesn't need to be tested straight away before going into service, but when you come around to your next testing cycle within 6 months, it should then be tested. And there is a new to service tag that you can actually put on those items to say that this item is new to service, and then when the person responsible for doing your testing and tagging comes back around the workplace, they'll see if that is a new item and they can set it up for the new test sequence. Okay, so looking at all the appliances within the workplace, and I'll cover off the environments in a couple of slides' time, because some things actually don't require testing all that often, if at all. But essentially fixed and stationary equipment that's connected by a flexible or fixed cable, which is not flexed in normal use, is not required to be tested. So anything hardwired, in other words. So if an electrician's installing a new press out back and they're hardwiring it, or if it's off a pendant from the ceiling, that type of thing, then it may not need to be tested at all. But if the flexible cord is flexed and the equipment can be moved, then test and tag is normally required. And a lot of people are putting it into the printing type environment. You might think you've got a large three-phase press that actually does plug in via a three-phase plug. That still can essentially be classified as a portable appliance and should be tested. And I can tell you firsthand, we've got three-phase presses that we've run over the journey, and the testing and tagging process can actually be a really important process for operator safety. And we run tests on some of our presses where we've had multiple different parts to that press, and the reading will change depending on how many parts of that press is you go. So if you've got laminating facilities or die cutting facilities or flexo or whatever, as you engage more of that machine, it can affect the reading on the tester. So we take people through those processes, and it is quite possible, particularly with modifications to machinery where earthing and things are involved. So if your electrician's adding an extra part to the machine, testing and tagging can be an important part of that process once it's done, to make sure that the earthing system and everything is working effectively. So even though those big presses, you think, well, they don't get moved and they don't get picked up and they don't get flexed in normal use, testing and tagging is still worth considering in those processes as a good safety mechanism. Anything that's connected to 2.5 metres above the ground, a good example of that would be, say, an air conditioner that's mounted to the wall that has a flexible lead that plugs into a power point. That type of item does not need to be tested. What we look for when we're testing and tagging, this is a few little images here, and you'll be surprised the amount of dangerous items that are out there if you actually know what you're looking for. Some of these are blatant faults. You see things like burn marks. That one's actually got a screw hole that's been attached. Someone's probably tried to screw it to something to mount it. All those things can affect the electrical integrity of it. That's something that's been in a fairly industrial area. This is a fairly common fault with we call the stress area or the stress grommet on a plug, because a lot of leads or tools that are getting moved around and flexed, they hit the main flex point, and then the electrical cable can come out and get exposed. You see lots of horror stories where people have connected things incorrectly and provide dangerous shock hazards. This sort of thing is very common, particularly out in a workplace environment where you might have forklifts and things that do run over leads. The minute that copper is exposed, you are putting workers at risk of electric shock. Non-compliant equipment, there you see that there's a process that you would put in place, and the responsible person is what we call the person in charge of it. So that may be the business owner, it may be the occupational health and safety representative, but each workplace has to have a responsible person. Normally they would stipulate to the person conducting the testing and tagging the action required for a faulty test. Obviously it's got to be pulled out of service, so we want the goods to be, or the item to be taken away from potential harm. There's tags you normally put on it to say, danger, this item's out of service. Some business owners will say if it's faulty, cut the plug off, we'll get it repaired or get it looked at, and if the plug's not on it, then obviously it can't be used to harm anybody. So having a process in place is important for non-compliant equipment. Obviously once it's been tested, if it does pass, then it needs to have a test tag on it, so there's a visual aid to everybody that's using that item to say that it has been tested and is safe for use. And that would normally, the information that needs to be on there is the person or company that conducted the test. There can be something as simple if it's been done in-house, just having a tester's ID, which can be an initial, and the test date and the next test due. There's other areas on most tags for things like certification numbers and plant numbers. They're only optional, they don't need to be there. The tag just has to have the name, obviously the details on who tested, the test date and when the next test is due. And that is attached to the plug-in of the lead. New equipment I mentioned before, that's the example there of a new to service tag. For those of you who have large businesses that do have a lot of new stock coming through, you'd have a packet of those sitting somewhere in a cupboard, and if something new comes in, you just stick one on and you'd say the date that it was introduced, and then you can assess the next test date based on the test cycle for where it's going. Documentation, it's obviously important to keep documentation. That's the register that the testing has been done. Simple version of that is a logbook. Most people these days use some form of software. An Excel spreadsheet is fine, so just basically having a list of the items, its location, the test date and the next test due is pretty simple. That's all you need to have. There is apps and things that run on Apple devices or Android devices that do make it quick and easy. Probably not that necessary if you're doing the testing tagging in-house, but unless you've got a huge volume of stuff, then that can certainly streamline things. But I would say for most of you, just set up a simple Excel spreadsheet. You can print the report off, and if you are getting an external contractor, then they would need to provide you with a report of that information as part of their process. Now this chart, probably not going to shuffle that well to most of you viewing the screen, but this is just a quick extract of the table that's within the Australian standards. So on the left-hand side you can see a list of the different types of environments. So you've got factories and workshops, places of work or repair, manufacturing, assembly, maintenance or fabrication. Relating it to the printing industry, that would be your press room where you're actually conducting the printing. As I said, if you're doing a digital facility these days, then you could probably not, I wouldn't classify that necessarily as a manufacturing environment. If they're in a sort of air-conditioned environment with carpet and nice clean area, then that could be classified more as an office-type environment. At the end of the day, it's the responsibility of the business owner to interpret this table, and that's where we do train people through the process of our courses to be able to understand how to classify the different types of environments. And our recommendation is always try not to stray too far away from what's within this standard, because the ramifications there, if you said, look, oh no, it's an office environment, let's do it every 5 years, and something did happen and it was found that that is in fact probably more hostile than an office type environment, then you do leave yourself a little bit exposed. So if it's an environment where the equipment or supply of the flexible cord is subject to flexing in normal use or is open to abuse in a hostile environment, the testing sequence would be 12 monthly. A good example of that, I suppose, from a printing industry perspective would be more of a, like if you've got a showroom or an area where you bring clients in and there's things, equipment within that area that your customers and staff would be handling, that would be probably somewhere you'd say, well, let's just do that 12 monthly to be on the safe side, whereas your pre-press area out the back, you might do that every 5 years because it's only going to be your staff, it's their computers sitting under desks, they're not likely to be subject to dust or moisture, vibration, those types of things, so you would test that equipment once every 5 years. And look, these days the lifespan of most computers wouldn't be over 5 years anyway, so that's where your new to service tags can come into it. And they wouldn't be put on the equipment as it goes in. You'd log it with the date that it was put into service and that it's a 5-yearly test cycle. That way if it did get over 5 years, then you'd look at testing it then. The other areas there, you've got hire equipment and equipment for commercial cleaning and repaired equipment. So that sort of stuff's not really going to apply to the printing business. The main area you'll be involved with is the manufacturing of the press floor, which I'd say would be 6 months to 12 months, depending on the type of environment, and then your office area would be 5 yearly. So costs, for those of you who haven't had testing and tagging, some may have had it done by external contractors. The cost can vary quite greatly. We normally try and work on an average of 3 to 5, and a lot of that will depend on the volume. This is for getting an external contractor in, obviously. If you've got lots of equipment, then the price per item is obviously going to come down a fair bit. I did a little scenario there. It's really hard to understand what the different types of businesses that you're all involved with, but a small printing business could have up to sort of 50 items out on the press floor. But that would be 6 monthly, so at 50 items at an average price of $4 would be $200 every 6 months, so $400 a year. And then if you had a similar sort of number in your office area, it'd be another sort of $200 per year. So you're looking at under $1,000 for a small business to be able to get an external contractor to come in and do it. And a large business, if you've got a lot more equipment, then that can be substantially more. So obviously working on that scale, your price would come down per item, but it could be as much as sort of $2,000 to $5,000 per year. And you've also got to think of the inconvenience to the business as well, which we know is all a bit of a pain in the backside, but if you've got people coming in that need to access equipment, then that can be disruptive to the workplace. And can actually be one of the advantages of having somebody in-house trained to be able to do it, because you can control when the process happens. You can do it outside of busy areas or busy times where the presses need to be running jobs. Yeah, so I guess the flip side of having an external contractor come in, and I'm not talking people out of it, there is definitely some advantages in having external contractors in doing it, and there are some very good operators out there. So if you're looking at getting an external contractor, do your homework, get multiple people to come in and provide some quotes. I would question experience of the testers and those sorts of things as well, just to make sure that you're getting somebody that's done it for a while and has got a good reputation out there. But if you bring it in-house, then we've got a special at the moment which Yoshi will send out some details to all of you, which allows you to get the basic appliance tester and a short course for $899 plus GST, which is a substantial saving. Normally though that type of course would be $329 per person, and the tester is around $750, so it's quite a good saving there of over 20%. We do have additional discounts for training, again, which I can get Yoshi to send out later. So if people did happen to have an appliance tester and did want to send somebody through a course, then we were offering discounts for industry association members. And we can also, for those larger businesses that might want to have multiple people trained up, we can come out on site and do that training as well. And I might add, we're not the only training provider out there. There's plenty of companies that do it. We do have national coverage, but if you did want to shop around and have a look, then by all means have a look at other training providers out there and compare products. I would recommend that you do use somebody that is a registered training organisation. There are quite a few people offering what we call non-accredited training that run test and tag businesses on the side and are looking at that as an additional source of revenue. But as a training organisation, all of our trainers have to be have at least a minimum of a Cert 4 in training and assessment, as would other training organisations, and obviously a certain level of industry experience. So I think I've just about used up my half hour. Hopefully that's given you a good overview of the process of testing and tagging, and I'm happy to throw it out there for some questions.
Thank you very much. So as mentioned, if anyone wants to get in touch with me for any more information about these deals, my email address is yoshi, which is YOSHI, @printnet.com.au, or if you had an email reminding you about this webinar, please just reply to that and that will come through to me. So while I just wait for a few more questions to come through, I'll just remind everyone that we have a survey going on at the moment called the Web to Print survey. If anyone wants to participate in that, please get in touch with me. Once again, it's yoshi @printnet.com.au. That's basically looking at the use of web to print platforms in our industry. The information that we gather will be used to give you tips for the future, give you case studies of successful and not so successful businesses that have used web to print. So if you want more information about that, please email me. But back onto the topic, we have some questions coming through. And question one is, if we have contractors working on site, does their equipment have to be tagged and tested? And if so, is it our responsibility to do it?
That's a very good question, and the answer is yes. Essentially, anybody coming on site, you are responsible for their equipment, and whilst they're operating within your facility, you are the responsible person, or that as a business owner, you're responsible for anything that could happen to them. So we actually had an example of that I can use ourselves. We had a cleaner that regularly comes in, and she comes in twice a week, and I noticed, after about a month that she didn't have her stuff tested and tagged, and I actually had her stuff tested. We found a fault with it, and the fault was actually a fairly substantial nick in the lead, and had she been dragging that vacuum around and run it up against somebody sitting on a metal chair, that would have been instant electrocution. So, and I would have been the one that was liable for that. So, yes, you are responsible for anybody coming on site.
Thank you. And I've got two questions that I'm going to roll into one, which is, if using three-phase machines, is it a different testing point? And do the courses change if you're acquiring three-phase knowledge?
Yes. So just the second part of that, Yoshi, was that, do the qualifications change for three-phase?
Yes, do the courses change if you're acquiring a three-phase knowledge?
Okay, that's another good question. Yeah, essentially you are covered to do three-phase equipment after the standard one-day course, so that would meet the criteria of what we classify as a competent person. That said, we don't spend a huge amount of time on three-phase equipment during the one-day course, simply because most people aren't exposed to it. As printing businesses, you are going to have a range of three-phase equipment, most of you out in the press room. So to test that, there is a separate adapter that you would use to be able. You can still use your standard appliance tester, and that checks the earth integrity of the item. But to be able to probably test three-phase appliances, and this comes back to the example I used during the presentation where we did it on our press, you've actually got to run the machine, so you've got to run it through three-phase power, and in doing that you can detect any potential faults. If you do a standard test using the basic tester and what we call a basic adapter, it will probably pass all day long, but you haven't really tested the machine properly, because when you've got things like switches and relays and things that are part of the electrical circuit of that item, the only way to get past those and test them properly is to apply three-phase power, and then you might have things like a rewind motor, like I said, or a laminator that you may not use, but if you switch that laminator on, then that engages another part of that machine. So the three-phase side of things can certainly be done by a competent person. We do have an additional three-phase course that we run, which is another 3-hour session. So yeah, my advice would be, if there is large amounts of three-phase equipment that you wanted to be able to take care of yourself, then I would certainly recommend the additional 3-hour training session, and I'm happy to put together some discounts for the printing industry on that one as well. The other alternative is to, if you've got electricians that do come in to do the preventative maintenance on a regular basis, perhaps get them to do the three-phase equipment, which might only be a handful of items, and then you can do the bulk of it with your in-house person. So there's a couple of options there.
Sounds good. And our next question is, does it state on any standards or regulation what equipment has to be tested for Class 1, Class 2 or lead power board? For example, printing press equals earth, guillotines equal Class 2 and so on.
No, there's nothing in the standard that actually stipulates what appliances are. That's on the plate of the, I think if I'm interpreting the question correctly. So the item will have a plate on it which will stipulate whether it's Class 1 or Class 2. And then once you've ascertained whether it's Class 1 or Class 2, then you would conduct the correct test using the portable appliance tester. So, and then the test frequency doesn't change. So if it's Class 1 or Class 2, it would still apply using that table. So Class 1 or Class 2 could still come under a 6-monthly test process or regime. It wouldn't be that a Class 2 item gets tested 12 monthly and then a Class 1 item gets tested 6 monthly. So it just depends on the environment, and then the same test frequency would apply whether it is Class 1 or Class 2 or a power board. I hope I answered that question correctly.
Absolutely. Yes, I have. Okay, thanks. So I believe you have.
Okay.
And
very good.
the next question is, does the equipment which is used for test and tag need checking periodically?
Yes. It's recommended that the equipment is calibrated on a regular basis, and normally it says in the standard according to manufacturer's specifications, and all manufacturers recommend that it's checked 12 monthly. So it's not actually going through a process of testing and tagging, particularly because a lot of these are battery operated items. they do have the ability to be able to run through mains power as well. So the test that we do, or the check that we do on appliance testers on a regular basis, is just a straight calibration to measure that it says something's passing or failing, that it is actually passing and failing. So we're just checking the integrity of the appliance tester. And depending on the brand or the type of appliance tester, that the cost to do that would range from $100 to $200 every 12 months.
Great. Thank you. And I think we have one more question. So if anyone else has something to ask, please jump in now. But as far as I know, this is the last question, which is, does the person responsible for tag and testing need to regularly update their qualifications? And if so, does this cost anything?
Okay, another very good question. The simple answer is no. It's because it's what we call competency-based training. I guess once you're deemed to be competent, you're deemed to be competent for life. It's not that you're going to lose the competency for that task. What is required, though, is for the responsible, or the person conducting the testing and tagging, to keep up to date with any potential changes. So part of that competency is maintaining currency. That would mean keeping up to date with any changes to the standard or any regulations such as the codes of practice and the Workplace Health and Safety Act. So we actually give people a mechanism to be able to subscribe to various websites that will keep them up to date with those changes. But essentially, no, there's no need to retrain as you might have to do in something like first aid. So it's once you're deemed competent, you're competent for life.
Great, and we've just had a couple more questions come in. The first one is, what insurance is needed, if any, to cover the tester in the case that there is... Hang on, someone else asked and I brought my question up. Hang on. What insurance is needed, if any, to cover the tester in the case that there is a future electrical problem with the tested item?
Okay, so what... essentially there's no insurance needed. The insurance coverage would come under your standard work cover agreement with your state provider, or whoever you've got your workplace health and safety insurance with. The person conducting the test is only assessing that item at that period of time. And it is quite possible that they could test the item and then put it back into service, then a forklift runs over the lead and that item is now dangerous and unsafe for use. So if something like that did happen, then worst case scenario, somebody was actually injured as a result of using that appliance after it was recently tested, there's no liability on the person conducting the test, provided they've had training and they can prove that they were competent in that task. So, and this actually did happen recently in Victoria. There was a case that was before the courts where somebody was electrocuted. They weren't killed, but they were permanently disabled from the electrocution, and then they sued their employer. And as part of that process, they went through what had happened, because the item had actually been tested and tagged. It had been tested and tagged quite a few years ago and hadn't been retested in the period that it should have. But in doing that, they questioned the person that conducted that original test. And obviously that person had evidence to say that they'd done a course. They were able to prove that they were competent in the task, and at the time they assessed the item, they did the right thing. So they classified it correctly, they tested it correctly, so they were fine. In this instance, the business owner was found liable because they hadn't retested in that time frame that they should have. So provided you have, the person has a competency and that things are tested within the time frames of the Australian standard, then your standard insurance would be more than enough to cover it.
Great, and I still have a few more questions, which is always good. The next question is, in regards to bigger machines like a printing press, would a simple tester be enough for testing?
Yeah, if it would be, if it's single phase, obviously. If it's three phase, then you would need to look at the additional three phase adapter to be able to do that. So to give you an idea of the costs, there are some basic adapters that are around about $200 or $300 mark, but again, they don't test it properly, so there are people out there that will just go, oh, that'll do. But best practice is a three-phase adapter that will allow you to power it up and run under power, and they're $795, I think, off the top of my head. So around about another $800, and that would give you the flexibility to do all of your three-phase equipment.
Yes, the person just confirmed they're talking about three-phase. Great, and a couple more questions. I have had someone ask about the presentation. Would they be able to get a copy of the presentation slides for this webinar?
Yep, happy to provide that.
Yep, just give that to me and I'll just send that out to everyone. And I think I have one final question. So again, if anyone else wants to ask anything, this is your last chance. If you complete a test and tag and within the testing period the machine or lead fails and causes a fire, are you responsible?
No. So simple answer. If you've tested and tagged in accordance with the Australian standard and the person conducting the test had the qualifications or the evidence of competency, then no, you wouldn't be. As far as causing fires go, there's some statistics that came out of the UK recently, and it was quite alarming the number of fires, both domestic and in the workplace, that are caused by faulty portable appliances. And the advent of a lot of these cheap imports now for power boards and chargers and those types of things, there's a fairly strong argument for that the testing and tagging can reduce the risk of fire. But the normal process, I'd imagine, would go from an insurance company having a look at it. And if you said that we've tested and tagged and there was still a fire, then the insurance company would have no choice other than to say, well, we need to honour the claim, would be my guess. I hope that answers the question.
I think it did. And we've had one more question come in, which is, I thought that any large unmovable items did not need to be tested. Is this correct?
If they are movable, even if they may require a forklift or a lift to move them, this basic standard says that if it's not flexed in normal use, then it may not need to be tested. So you could say that, look, there's no way that this ever gets moved. It's been bolted to the floor, even though it may have a flexible lead, and that flexible lead does not get flexed in normal use, then yes, you could say that that does not need to be tested, and that would be quite okay.
No problem. And I think that's it. So once again, I will pass on the slides for this webinar to everyone. If anyone wants to get in touch with me with any wanting any information about the special deal for our members, please email me. My name is Yoshi, which is YOSHI at printnet.com.au. If you want to get in touch with Jason, I'll pass on his contact details, of course. And if anyone wants to rewatch this webinar, if you are a member, we've recorded it and we will upload it to our Better Business site, so you can rewatch it starting hopefully from tomorrow. I think that's it, so thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Jason, for hosting, and hopefully I will see you all next time.